The rain fell in thin, endless ribbons, slashing across the skyline of Gotham like liquid glass. The city never truly slept, only shifted its nightmares from one district to the next. On the rooftops, the world's greatest detective stood silent beneath the thunder, his cape snapping like a shadow torn by the wind. Below, the streets churned with sirens, broken lights, and the constant hum of corruption, an orchestra Batman knew by heart. Tonight was supposed to be simple, another cult, another delusion of grandeur. Yet even he could sense the wrongness in the air, a subtle vibration beneath the thunder, as though the storm itself whispered his name. He moved through the drenched night with the precision of a predator, grapnel lines slicing through the air, boots finding purchase on slick metal. The rooftops stretched like a chessboard of decay, and at its center, an abandoned cathedral, its spire cracked and sagging. According to Oracle's last trace, that was where the followers of the Crimson Spiral had gathered. They had stolen something ancient, something that didn't belong in any museum or vault. A relic shaped like a sphere of black glass, its surface carved with impossible runes. Batman's entry was silent. He slipped through the shattered rose window, cape folding around him like smoke. Inside, candlelight flickered against blood-painted murals. Figures knelt before the relic, whispering in tongues that grated on the edge of comprehension. Their leader, a man draped in crimson robes, raised a knife that shimmered unnaturally in the glow. The veil weakens, the cultist hissed. Tonight, the god beyond will open his eye. Batman struck without hesitation. A batarang severed the candle's wick, plunging the room into darkness. Then came motion, fluid, disciplined, merciless. Bones cracked beneath gauntleted fists. A gun fired and the bullet flattened harmlessly against his armor. In seconds, the cult lay unconscious or writhing in pain. But as he turned toward the altar, he saw the relic pulsing, its runes bleeding red light across the stone floor. He reached for a containment unit from his belt, intending to seal it before the energy could spread, but the relic's glow intensified, vibrating with an inhuman hum that shook the air. The cathedral trembled. Statues toppled. The relic cracked, and within its core, something vast stirred. A sound tore through existence, not a noise but a presence. The shadows deepened into forms, stretching into claws and wings and faces that could not exist in any sane geometry. Batman staggered back, shielding his eyes as gravity itself seemed to warp. Then came the light, crimson lightning that struck from the ceiling straight into the relic. It split open like a wound in space, a tear revealing a realm of impossible color and motion. Batman's instincts screamed to retreat, but his mission-driven mind refused. If this was a weapon, it could not fall into anyone's hands. He hurled a charge into the relic's core. The explosion should have shattered it. Instead, the energy folded inward, dragging everything. Smoke, rubble, air toward its center. Batman fired his grapnel, anchoring to the wall, but the pull was immense. His gauntlet strained, servos groaning. Sparks leapt from his armor as the warp light devoured the world around him. For a heartbeat, he saw flashes. Cities burning beneath alien stars, armies of iron giants marching through fire, a throne of corpses worshipped by a god of gold. He tried to resist, but the void reached through, whispering in voices that were not human. Justice is a lie. Order is decay. You could reshape it all. His grip failed. The line snapped and he was hurled forward, through light, through sound, through a scream that seemed to last forever. The world inverted, and then there was silence. When awareness returned, there was no Gotham, no thunder, only a sky of blood and ash. Blood and ash. He lay on blackened soil, smoke rising in lazy spirals from craters filled with corpses. In the distance, machines like walking fortresses exchanged fire, missiles arcing like falling stars. The ground trembled with every impact. Batman forced himself upright, scanning his surroundings, his HUD flickering erratically. Atmospheric toxins, radiation spikes, gravity fluctuation. None of it matched any Earth data. A shadow passed overhead, a gunship angular and baroque, marked with a two-headed eagle. It unleashed torrents of fire upon figures below, humanoid, but twisted, bearing horns and molten skin. The battle was apocalyptic. Then he saw them, warriors in black and white armor, massive as tanks, wielding bolters that roared like thunder. Their movements were ritualistic, each strike accompanied by murmured prayers. They fought not as men but as zealots, holy soldiers in a war beyond reason. Batman took cover behind a shattered obelisk, watching as one of the giants fell, his chest torn open by claws that shimmered with warp energy. Another bellowed, "For Dawn! For the Emperor!" before detonating a grenade that erased both friend and foe in a crimson mist. Batman's analytical mind processed fragments, tactics, weaponry coordination, but nothing explained their existence. A nearby explosion threw him backward. He landed hard, his armor sparking. Through the smoke, a figure loomed, a chaos cultist, his flesh warped into armor, eyes burning with unnatural light. The creature laughed and lunged. Batman reacted purely on instinct. A blade flashed from his gauntlet, slicing through muscle and bone. The monster collapsed, dissolving into ash that hissed like boiling oil. He stood alone amid the wreckage, his chest heaving, his mind cold and methodical. Somewhere in this madness there had to be a reason, a way home, or at least an understanding of where he had been cast. He activated his scanner, but every reading returned static, interference from something far larger than mere technology. Then faintly through the smoke came a new sound. The rhythmic march of heavy boots. From the haze emerged figures, their armor adorned with purity seals, their visors glowing white. One raised a weapon that could obliterate a tank. By decree of the Emperor, a voice thundered through a vox speaker, "You are surrounded, heretic. Kneel before the judgment of the Imperium." Batman raised his hands slowly, his cape torn and his armor scorched, yet his mind never stopped calculating. Escape was impossible. Surrender, temporary. He observed the sigils, the discipline, the reverence in their stance. Soldiers of faith, fanatics of a dying god. He met their gaze and spoke, his voice calm beneath the storm. "I'm not your enemy." The nearest warrior tilted his head slightly. The bolter's muzzle gleamed beneath the red sky. "Then pray," the soldier said, "the Inquisition agrees." The words echoed as they closed in, iron boots crunching on the bones of the fallen. Above them, the blood-red clouds twisted again, as though watching. Somewhere beyond the veil of worlds, something vast and patient smiled. Darkness did not come with silence. It came with 1,000 whispers, each one clawing at the edge of thought. Batman floated in a void that pulsed like a living thing, a storm without horizon. There was no gravity, no up or down, only motion without meaning. Shadows twisted into forms both human and monstrous before unraveling into smoke again. His armor system screamed errors. His HUD flickered between dimensions of impossible data, coordinates that bent themselves into madness. He reached instinctively for control, his mind anchoring on discipline, breath, calculation. Pain was real. Focus was survival. But the air, or what passed for it, vibrated with emotion, feeding on fear, rage, and regret. It whispered in voices he knew too well. His parents' dying screams echoed faintly through the void, followed by the Joker's laugh, stretched and distorted until it sounded like something inhuman. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to ignore it, but the sound grew louder, spreading into millions of mocking tones that bled together into one great howling chorus. He tried to move to stabilize his position, but every motion fractured into delay. His limbs lagged, his own body rippling like an echo out of time. A figure formed before him, a reflection of himself, darker, broader, its eyes burning like coals. The apparition's voice was a mirror broken into shards. "You've fought to control the chaos all your life. You've caged it, studied it, feared it, but here's..." Batman said nothing. He'd faced illusions before. Scarecrow's toxins, psychic projections, the delusions of the mad. But this was something deeper, invasive, personal. The shadow approached, and with each step the void changed color, indigo bleeding into crimson, crimson into molten gold. Around them fragments of Gotham hovered like shattered glass, the skyline bent in unnatural angles, the bat signal flickering upside down, and beneath it all, an ocean of eyes. The shadow reached for him. "They never feared enough," it whispered. "You could have saved them all. But you were too weak, too bound by rules. Here there are no rules, only the will to shape what is." Batman raised his hand, but his gauntlet dissolved into smoke. He struck anyway, the motion instinctive, primal. The shadow caught his fist midair, and the contact sent a shockwave rippling through the void. The howling grew louder, now joined by laughter, not cruel, but celebratory, like an audience watching the birth of something magnificent and terrible. "You could end it all," the shadow said, "and no crime, no injustice, no corruption, only order. You could be what this universe has always needed." Its face drew closer, until he could see himself within the burning eyes, a reflection of power unbound by conscience. All it takes is a single choice. He closed his eyes, but no, the void screamed in protest. The reflection shattered fragments spiraling away like dying stars. The world folded in upon itself, collapsing into a tunnel of light and sound. He fell again, tumbling through visions too vast to comprehend, cathedrals the size of continents, fleets of ships bleeding fire across the heavens, planets consumed by the laughter of gods. The immensity of it all crushed against his mind, and for a moment even he, the man who had faced every terror Gotham could conjure, felt something close to despair. Then came the light, not warm or divine, but cold and metallic, filled with data, structure, reason. It cut through the storm like a blade, dragging him toward coherence. He felt impact, harsh, physical, grounding, metal beneath his boots. Gravity returned heavy and unforgiving. The howling receded into a distant, hateful murmur. Batman staggered, forcing his lungs to draw breath. He stood upon a vast bridge suspended between two broken moons. The stars around him pulsed like dying embers, and rivers of molten energy flowed through cracks in the structure. Machinery of alien design hummed beneath the surface, feeding on the warp's chaos to sustain impossible architecture. His visor flickered to life, briefly stabilizing enough to record the environment. Gravitational anomalies, atmospheric instability, unknown energy signatures. All readings pointed to one impossible conclusion. He was still within the void, but standing on something that pretended to be real. He walked forward, each step echoing across the bridge. The hum of the structure matched the rhythm of his heartbeat. Then, from the fog ahead, figures emerged, hooded, silent, their forms fluid as smoke. They spoke as one, their voices layered atop each other like a chant. The mortal resists. The shadow denies its own ascension. Batman stopped, assessing them with surgical calm. "Who are you?" They tilted their heads as though confused by the question. "Our names are for the blind. We are what your world denied. We are thought unchained. We are thought unchained." The architects of nightmare and reason. He took a step back, readying a defensive stance. "You're nothing but the noise between worlds." The fog thickened. From within, one of the figures extended a limb, not flesh but shifting light. A noise can shape reality if it is believed long enough. "Your will is strong, mortal. Strong enough to command even us. You could build your Gotham again, perfect, eternal." Batman's jaw tightened. A Gotham doesn't need perfection. It needs people who still fight. The figures hissed, recoiling like wounded beasts. The void trembled. "Then you will be remade. Your resistance will teach you what truth costs." The bridge convulsed. The structure cracked, metal screaming. A vortex of crimson light erupted beneath his feet, pulling him downward again. He fought it, driving grapnels into the collapsing surface, but the anchors melted instantly. He was falling once more, the whispers returning, softer now, but hungrier, feeding on the exhaustion creeping into his mind. In the whirl of light, one voice cut through the chaos, cold, precise, almost human. "He endures. The mortal resists corruption. Perhaps he may serve." He tried to see the source, but the light consumed all shape, turning the universe into a single burning spiral. Pain lanced through his skull, and then everything dissolved. When he opened his eyes again, there was ground beneath him, charred, cracked, soaked in ash. A sky the color of dying embers hung overhead. The howling had ceased, but the echoes lingered inside his skull like a memory that refused to die real. He had no idea how long he'd been drifting between worlds, only that the void had changed him in ways unseen. He exhaled slowly, his voice a whisper swallowed by the wind. "I'm not done yet." Somewhere, far beyond the clouds, something vast stirred, watching, waiting, curious about the man who had stared into the warp and refused to break. The wind carried the smell of burnt oil and charred flesh. Batman rose to his feet slowly, his boots grinding over scorched ash and broken metal. The world around him was not a city but a graveyard of machinery and bone. Towers of twisted iron loomed in the distance, their spires cracked and bleeding molten rivers into the ground. Thunder rumbled, not from clouds, but from artillery. Distant yet constant, like a heartbeat that refused to die. He steadied his breath, assessing his surroundings. His armor systems had stabilized somewhat, but many readings remained corrupted. Radiation, lethal. Oxygen, thin. Gravitational flux, variable. Yet somehow he was still alive. He touched the side of his cowl, running diagnostics manually. The AI core had rebooted into emergency mode, feeding fragmented data. The readings identified energy traces of unknown origin, psycho-reactive, fluctuating, impossible. Then he saw it, a glimmer of movement through the haze. Shapes marching in formation, tall and disciplined, armored like walking tanks. Their armor bore the cross and purity seals of religious knights. Behind them, banners fluttered with a sigil, an eagle with two heads. Their boots thundered in unison across the cracked terrain. Batote. In the sky above them, streaks of light descended, drop pods slamming into the surface, each impact a miniature earthquake. Batman moved silently toward a ridge for a better vantage point. His eyes narrowed behind the mask. These were soldiers, but not human by normal standards. Each stood nearly twice his height, their weapons the size of cannons. They moved with mechanical precision, yet their voices, distorted through vox amplifiers, carried the zeal of faith. By the Emperor's will cleanse the unholy. One of them roared, firing a bolter. The weapon's thunder split the air, shells bursting into explosions that turned a horde of figures into clouds of blood and flame. The targets, chaos cultists, twisted beyond recognition, charged with frenzied devotion, chanting names that made the air tremble. Some were barely human, their skin fused with metal, either bearing horns or eyes where no eyes should be. Batman felt his instincts kick in. Observation, strategy, adaptation. These were soldiers bound by ritual and dogma, and their enemies were corrupted, mutated. It wasn't war, it was exorcism by fire. He analyzed patterns of movement, assessing tactics. These giants fought with efficiency, but no subtlety. No reconnaissance, no stealth. Pure, divine aggression. The battle surged closer. A wounded warrior fell, his chest plate torn open by a demon's claws. The creature towered over him, its body a mass of writhing flesh and molten armor. Without thinking, Batman moved. He launched a grapnel, swung through the smoke, and landed behind the beast. His gauntlet blade extended, striking upward into the creature's exposed spine. The demon shrieked, its voice like tearing metal. It swung a limb the size of a tree, catching Batman across the chest and sending him sprawling through dust and debris. Pain flared, but training overrode it. He rose through 3 explosive charges. Zoof. They detonated in sequence, blasting the demon into fragments of burning flesh. When the smoke cleared, only Batman remained standing, battered but alive. The fallen warrior's gaze turned toward him, eyes dimming behind cracked lenses. "You fight without the creed," the voice rasped through a broken vox grill. "Who commands you?" Batman crouched beside him, and no one. The giant's hand twitched weakly, reaching toward a pendant shaped like a winged skull. "Then, pray, the Inquisition will decide if you are worth saving. If you are worth saving." His voice faded into static. Before Batman could respond, the ground trembled again. Another detachment approached, 5 armored giants advancing with weapons raised. One knelt beside the fallen soldier, removing a seal from his armor. The leader's gaze turned toward Batman. "Identify yourself." "I'm not your enemy," Batman replied evenly. The massive warrior studied him for a long moment. "Alien origin, unauthorized technology. You stand upon consecrated ground. Explain your presence or be purged." Batman straightened, cape torn and smoldering at the edges. "I'm searching for answers. A gateway brought me here. It wasn't by choice." The leader's eyes glowed faintly through his helmet lenses. "The warp," he spat the word like venom. "If it touched you, then you are tainted. The Inquisitor will decide your fate." 2 soldiers advanced, their bolters trained on him. Batman considered resistance, calculating angles, timing probabilities, but something deeper warned against it. He needed to learn, not die in ignorance. He allowed them to restrain him, though the shackles barely fit around his armored wrists. They marched him through the wasteland toward a waiting craft, an armored transport marked with sigils that glowed faintly blue. Inside, the air stank of incense and gun oil. Chains hung from the walls, each bearing a seal inscribed with prayers. One of the soldiers muttered them continuously under his breath, as though warding off unseen spirits. Through a narrow viewport, Batman saw the battlefield receding, a landscape of ruin swallowed by flame. Above it, the sky split open with thunder, and distant ships rained fire upon the world. It was destruction on a scale no human war had ever reached. He had seen madness before, but never faith weaponized so completely. As the transport lifted, a deep voice filled the cabin's vox speakers. "This is Inquisitor Marentis. Bring the heretic to me alive." I would see the face of the soul the warp dared to return. The soldiers exchanged silent nods. Batman stared through the narrow slit of light, watching the dying world vanish beneath clouds of smoke. His mind raced. He needed context, information, understanding of this empire that worshipped its war like a god. But beneath all his logic, a single truth echoed from the void he had escaped. Those whispers hadn't lied. There was no returning to Gotham. That world was gone, a memory swallowed by the warp. He turned his gaze inward, testing the edges of his mind for corruption, for influence. There was something faint there, an echo, a trace of the voices from the void. Not control, not yet, but presence. Watching, waiting. The transport shuddered as it entered the upper atmosphere. Lightning streaked across the hull. The soldier beside him muttered another prayer, clutching a purity seal. Batman said nothing. He only stared out into the storm where lightning and fire met over a world that had long forgotten peace. He didn't know where they were taking him, but he knew one thing. Whatever this Imperium was, it built its justice on fear. And fear was something he understood better than anyone. The chamber reeked of sanctified oil and scorched metal. Chains hung from the vaulted ceiling like the entrails of some rusted machine god, each one bearing seals of wax and parchment scrawled with prayers. Batman stood at the center, his arms restrained by mag-locked shackles that hummed with energy. He had been stripped of most of his equipment, yet the cowl remained, its systems dormant, the lenses dull. His captors feared the unknown, and so they treated him as one might a weapon that could think. At the far end of the hall, a figure stepped from the shadows, Inquisitor Marentes. His armor was a patchwork of black carapace and gilded scripture, his face pale beneath a halo of augmetic implants. One bionic eye flickered crimson as it studied Batman with clinical precision. Behind him stood robed attendants, their faces hidden, their hands clutching censers that filled the air with the heavy scent of incense. Marentes' voice was iron dragged across stone. You emerged from a tier in the warp, bearing alien armor, heretical devices, and no sigil of allegiance. Tell me, stranger, what manner of demon are you? Batman met his gaze without flinching. I'm not a demon. I'm human. A human. The Inquisitor's laugh was low, humorless. No human endures the immaterium and lives uncorrupted. Speak truth. From which world do you hail? A Gotham, Batman replied. A city far from here. Another universe, perhaps. The attendants hissed softly, whispering litanies of warding. Marentes raised a hand, silencing them. Another universe, a convenient lie. Yet your tongue shapes words as ours do, and your flesh bleeds red, curious. He circled Batman slowly, examining the armor, the scars, the bearing of a man who moved with predatory restraint. You fight with discipline. You think with reason. Yet you carry no faith. That alone marks you as dangerous. I believe in justice, Batman said quietly. A justice, Marentes repeated, tasting the word as though it were poison. A pagan creed. Justice is what the Emperor decrees. All else is vanity. Batman's silence drew a faint smile from the Inquisitor. You will learn what vanity costs in the Imperium. Every breath, every thought is a sin without purpose if it does not serve his will. The attendants moved closer, pressing relics against Batman's armor, chanting the rites of purity. The runes fled faintly, reacting to some unseen energy. One of the robed figures gasped. No corruption detected, my lord. The subject's soul reads as silent. Marentes froze. Silent? Yes, my lord. No psychic resonance, no taint, nothing. The Inquisitor stepped closer, his augmetic eye whirring. Impossible. The warp leaves fingerprints upon everything it touches. He reached out, placing a hand against Batman's chest plate. The contact was brief but deliberate, a communion of flesh and machine. How does one pass through the eye of terror unmarked? Batman said nothing. The truth, that sheer willpower and refusal to yield had anchored him, would sound like madness here. Marentes studied him for a long moment before stepping back. Perhaps you are what you claim. Or perhaps you are something new, a weapon yet unnamed. The silence stretched. Then, with a motion of his hand, the Inquisitor dismissed the attendants. The heavy doors boomed shut, leaving only the two of them in the dim light of burning censers. Tell me, Batman, Marentes said, the word foreign in his mouth. What do you seek? Answers, Batman replied. And a way home. And a way home. There is no home beyond the Emperor's light, the Inquisitor said. You are here now, and the warp does not return its prey. You may yet serve if you can prove your worth. Before Batman could respond, a tremor rippled through the chamber. The candles guttered, and the air grew thick with static produced itself. The lights dimmed to a sullen red as a psychic pressure pressed down on them both. The attendants outside screamed. A voice not made for mortal ears echoed through the metal walls, an inhuman chorus. Marentes drew his bolt pistol instantly, his face hardening. A demon, incursion, Nicus. He turned to Batman, eyes narrowing. Did you summon this? No, Batman said, already testing the strength of his restraints. "But I can stop it." Marentes hesitated. Then with a curse he pressed a rune on the console. The shackles released with a hiss. "If you betray me, I will see you burn to ash before the hour ends." The wall behind them split open in a surge of violet flame. A creature of impossible form poured through. A demon of the warp, its flesh shifting between faces, its limbs a parody of motion. The temperature dropped instantly. Marentes fired, bolts exploding in flares of holy light, but the creature only laughed, a sound that shredded thought. Batman moved before fear could take root. He seized a fallen relic blade from a dead guard, its edge humming with power, and drove it upward into the demon's torso. The weapon seared through flesh that wasn't flesh, the air filling with a scent of ozone and rot. The creature shrieked, lashing out. A tendril struck him across the shoulder, sending him crashing into the altar. He rose again, bleeding but focused. The demon advanced, its body reforming around the wound. Batman flung a charge from his belt, a shaped explosion that ignited the incense vapors into a roaring fire. The chamber blazed with holy flame. Marentes chanted the Emperor's creed, his voice rising above the chaos. Together, man of faith and man of reason struck as one, the Inquisitor's blade driving through the demon's chest as Batman's gauntlet crushed its skull. The creature imploded, collapsing into a cloud of ash that smelled of burnt metal and blood. Silence returned, heavy and absolute. Marentes turned to Batman, his expression unreadable. "You fought as one trained for war, yet you carry no mark of our legions, no blessing of the Mechanicus, no prayer upon your lips." "I fight to survive," Batman said. The Inquisitor's gaze lingered on him, then softened by a fraction. "Perhaps the Emperor's hand guides even unbelievers. You will come with me to Terra. The Order will decide what manner of being you are." Batman gave a slow nod. The faint hum of the warp still echoed in his ears, the memory of its whispers coiling like smoke at the back of his mind. As the Inquisitor signaled the escort, Batman glanced once more at the scorched remains of the demon. The thing had spoken no words, yet its laughter still lingered. He realized then that the warp had not let him go. It had merely followed him, waiting for the moment he stopped fighting. The journey to Terra was a blur of silence and fire. Batman stood within the hold of the inquisitorial gunship as it tore through the void, engines howling against the abyss. Outside the reinforced viewport, the stars were not stars at all but cold embers of a dying galaxy. Vast ships glided through darkness like predators, their hulls carved with statues of angels and saints, their weapons glowing faintly like the eyes of gods half asleep. He had been in the air before, high above Gotham, watching storms crawl across its skyline, but this was different. This was not the sky of men. This was the dominion of faith, held together by will and fear. The soldiers aboard the ship, the acolytes of the Inquisition, never looked at him for long. They prayed constantly, murmuring litanies to the Emperor, as if the act of silence might invite damnation. Even Marentes kept his distance, conferring only with his astropath, a frail psychic whose eyes bled softly as she whispered coordinates drawn from the immaterial. When Terra finally emerged, it did not rise like a world. It loomed like a cathedral built upon the bones of a planet. Foe. Towers stretched beyond the atmosphere, their spires lost in storm and smoke. The light of the sun could not pierce the shroud of industry that hung around the throne world. From orbit, Batman saw entire continents drowned beneath structures, hive cities that breathed fire, oceans of stone carved into symbols of devotion. The planet itself seemed less alive than worshipping. The ship entered the atmosphere with a roar, carving through ash and cloud. Lightning rippled over the hull as the voice of 1,000 bells echoed faintly through the static. The air smelled of ozone and oil when the ramp descended. Batman stepped out into the glare of golden floodlights and the unceasing chant of pilgrims. The landing platform was an ocean of bodies, priests, guardsmen, penitents, all kneeling as the inquisitorial seal passed overhead. A city stretched before him, built in concentric rings of ruin and reverence. Statues of the Emperor towered over avenues wide enough for titans to march through. Every wall was etched with scripture, every breath a prayer. Yet beneath the chants, Batman heard something else, a tremor of desperation, a mass of humanity clinging to faith not out of devotion but fear. Inquisitor Marentes walked beside him, his robes whipping in the wind. "Behold the heart of mankind," he said, voice solemn. "A Terra, cradle of our species and throne of our God." Batman's gaze swept the horizon. "It looks like a tomb." Marentes' eyes narrowed, but he did not argue. Perhaps it must be to remind us of what was lost. He gestured to the looming palace in the distance, so vast it blurred into the horizon. That is where the Emperor endures. His light shields humanity from the warp's hunger. Without him, we would be less than dust. They boarded a procession of armored transports that rumbled through the sanctified streets. Pilgrims pressed themselves against the barriers, whispering prayers as Batman passed. Some spat in fear, others reached out, desperate to touch him, mistaking his black armor for that of a fallen saint. He ignored them, his mind cataloging everything, the layout, the surveillance drones, the unspoken rules. This was a civilization built not on progress, but on obedience. The transport climbed higher into the spires of the ecclesiarchal palace. Gilded bridges arched over bottomless chasms filled with chanting voices. Servitors hung from chains, endlessly reciting verses as incense smoke coiled around them like ghosts. They entered a hall so vast it felt like stepping inside the ribcage of a dead god. At its center lay a golden door, carved with depictions of war and ascension. Morentis stopped before it, turning to Batman. Few mortals are permitted this close. Consider this an honor. The Emperor's psychic radiance will test you. If you are truly untainted, you will survive the encounter. If not, his gaze hardened. Then even I will not save you. The door opened soundlessly. Light consumed everything. Batman's vision blurred, sensors overloading. The temperature dropped, then rose, then ceased to have meaning. He was no longer standing on stone, but on something both real and unreal and unreal. In the distance he sensed it, a presence that defied comprehension, a shape without form, a light without source. His breath caught as his mind filled with visions not his own, armies kneeling in worship, galaxies burning, a throne of gold upon which a corpse god sat unmoving yet infinite. He felt something brush against his thoughts, a whisper, a gaze that pierced deeper than flesh. It was not malevolent, it was not merciful, it simply was. The weight of it drove him to his knees. He remembered his parents, the streets of Gotham, the countless faces he had vowed to protect, and all of it seemed so small, so fragile. Then a flicker of something else. Not the Emperor's will, but an echo within the vast silence, a voice quiet and curious like a breath in the dark. They world without gods, and yet you defy them all. Interesting. Batman's pulse quickened. The words were not sound but thought. He looked up, but there was only radiance. Morentis's voice broke through the haze. Stand if you can. The Emperor sees into your soul. He judges the truth of you. Batman forced himself upright. The light seared his vision, but he endured it, as he had endured every nightmare before. The air thrummed with power, each heartbeat an eternity. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the light dimmed. The silence broke. He stood once more upon cold stone, sweat freezing on his skin. Morentis watched him with something resembling awe. He did not strike you down. Batman steadied his breathing. He wasn't here to be struck. The Inquisitor's expression darkened and numbed. You should not speak so lightly of divinity, alien or not. Still, you have been judged and found, unchosen, yet tolerated. That alone is a rarity. Batman said nothing. But as they turned to leave, he glanced back toward the golden chamber. Somewhere within that eternal radiance, he had felt something not divine but aware. It had not offered salvation, only curiosity. And in that moment, he understood something terrible. Whatever God ruled this universe, it did not watch to protect. It watched to remember. As the doors sealed behind them, Batman's reflection flickered briefly across the gilded surface. For just an instant, his eyes glowed faintly with the same cold gold as the light beyond. Then the shadow reclaimed them, and the mortal world returned. The cell was quiet, too quiet. It was deep within Terra's labyrinthine catacombs, a chamber meant not for punishment but containment. Batman sat upon the cold stone, motionless, his breathing slow and measured. The walls were alive with inscriptions of faith, their script etched into plasteel and sanctified in wax. Candles flickered in rhythmic rows, each flame bound by ritual to ward against the taint of the immaterium. Yet even here, surrounded by holy steel and the scent of incense, the whispers returned. They came in fragments at first, soft, uncertain, like echoes from memory. Then as the hours stretched into days, they became clearer. Why pipe mortal? The voice was not one, but many woven into a single consciousness that felt both infinite and intimate. You survived the howling storm. You endured the Emperor's gaze, yet you kneel here, caged by faithless men. Batman's eyes opened. His voice was steady, quiet. You're not real. Reality is fragile, the whisper replied, its tone shifting, now male, now female, now something between. You of all beings should know that. You built your life upon illusion. Fear masks symbols, but here fear has power. It breathes, it shapes worlds. He ignored it, closing his eyes again, forcing his mind to focus on pattern and logic. Sleep was impossible, so he used the rhythm of breath to anchor himself. Seconds, minutes, hours, yet the voice never ceased. It wound around his thoughts like smoke. You could use it, it said softly. The warp responds to will. You have strength unlike these zealots. Imagine a universe shaped by your justice, unbound by dogma, free of corruption. You could silence every monster, every tyrant. You could make them fear you across the stars. Batman's jaw tightened. The temptation was subtle, but he recognized it for what it was, a psychological weapon. The voice wanted him to agree, to accept its presence as true. It was no different than Scarecrow's toxin or the Joker's madness, only vaster, older. He rose to his feet, pacing the narrow confines of the cell. You feed on weakness, he said under his breath. You want me to break. We want you to see. The air shimmered. The candles dimmed, their flames drawn into a single swirling darkness at the room's center. The shadows stretched, coalescing into form. It was him, or rather, a distorted reflection. The cowl was twisted, the eyes glowing with blue fire. The symbol on the chest was not a bat, but a sigil, ancient and shifting. When it spoke, the voice was his own. You fought to save a world that never deserved saving, the apparition said. You fought criminals, gods, monsters, and still they came. Every victory rotted in the light of a new war. You don't fight for justice, you fight to end fighting. But you can't. Not there. Not in Gotham. Not anywhere. Batman's fists clenched. And your solution is corruption? The shadow smiled. A power. Real power. Not faith, not delusion. The warp bends to will. Fear is its language, and you've mastered it better than any demon. Imagine your enemies drowning in their own nightmares, your world remade by your hand. You wouldn't need to chase criminals. You'd erase the very concept of crime. He took a step forward. You're not offering power. You're offering control, and control is what destroys men. The reflection's grin widened. Then why have you spent your life chasing it? The words cut deep. For a heartbeat, the shadow seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. The walls vanished. Gotham rose around him, rain pouring through the fog, sirens wailing in the distance. He stood atop the same gargoyle where he had first worn the cowl. Below, the city burned, the skyline twisted into cathedrals of bone and metal. The bat signal flared crimson, the symbol warping into the eight-pointed star of chaos. Every villain he had ever faced stood beneath it. Joker, Two-Face, Bane, all kneeling in reverence. Behind them, armies of humans and demons alike chanted his name. The air trembled with their worship. He felt it then, a pulse of energy vast and intoxicating flowing through his veins like lightning. For an instant he believed he could change everything. Then he heard another voice, softer, human. Bruce. He turned. His parents stood at the edge of the rooftop, just as they had on that night in Crime Alley. His father's hand reached out, his mother's eyes filled with sorrow. They didn't speak, but the meaning was clear. This wasn't salvation. It was surrender. It was surrender. Batman exhaled slowly, the tension bleeding from his muscles. No, the illusion cracked. The city burned away. The cathedral returned, the shadows snarling as its form destabilized. You refuse perfection for weakness. Why refuse damnation? Batman said. The air exploded in light. The shadow screamed, splitting apart into fragments of black glass that dissolved into the floor. The candles reignited all at once, their flames burning white. For several moments, there was only silence. Then came the sound of boots beyond the door. The heavy locks disengaged and the iron portal creaked open. Inquisitor Morentis entered, flanked by two stormtroopers. His face was drawn, his eyes weary. You spoke to something, he said. It wasn't a question. Batman met his gaze. The warp doesn't rest. Morentis studied him as though weighing the truth against his instincts. Most minds crumble after such communion. Yours remains intact. Perhaps the Emperor's hand shields you. Or maybe your Emperor doesn't reach that far, Batman replied. The Inquisitor ignored the jab. You are being reassigned. The Ordo has decided to test your will in service. There is a world, Gotham. Hive City, population in the billions. It festers with heresy. You will accompany an Arbite's detachment as consultant. Batman raised an eyebrow. Were sending me to fight your heretics? To observe, Morentis corrected. To see if your strength can be of use to the Imperium, or if it must be erased. The troopers stepped forward, releasing his restraints. He flexed his hands, feeling blood return to the joints. The warp's echo still lingered at the back of his mind, a faint wisp. Then you've built an empire on the same principle as every criminal I ever fought. The Inquisitor said nothing, but his hand tightened on the hilt of his power sword. They reached the Arbite's precinct fortress, a slab of black stone bristling with gun turrets and gargoyles. A crimson glow bled through the choking smog as explosions rippled through the lower manufactorums. Vox channels screamed with overlapping reports. Riots, heretic uprisings, demon manifestations. The Arbite's fortress shuddered as artillery shells slammed against its outer walls. Batman stood in the command chamber beside Marshal Dren, his eyes fixed on the Halalilik map as the red sigils spread like infection. "They're coordinated," he said quietly. "This isn't chaos. It's strategy." Dren slammed his fist against the console. "Occultists have no strategy. They're vermin." "Well, they're vermin that adapt," Batman replied. "They know your response patterns. Every detachment you send vanishes because someone is feeding them information from inside." The Marshal's jaw tightened. "A treachery? A corruption?" Batman corrected. "A different name, same disease." Before Dren could respond, a detonation tore through the far end of the fortress. The power flickered, plunging the chamber into red emergency light. Sirens wailed. Through the smoke, a voice barked over the Vox. "A Section 12 breached. The heretics are inside." Dren drew his bolt pistol. "We hold the line." Batman was already moving. He sprinted through the smoke-filled corridors, cloak streaming behind him, the sound of gunfire echoing through the stone halls. Arbite's enforcers fell one by one, their armor cracked, their faces twisted in confusion. Some had turned their guns on their brothers. The taint of chaos had reached even here. He dropped into the lower levels where the fighting was heaviest. The air was thick with dust and the iron taste of blood. Cultists surged from the shadows, wielding makeshift blades and autoguns marked with the 8-pointed star. Batman fought with brutal precision. No wasted movement, no mercy. His gauntlets cracked skulls, his explosives tore through clusters of fanatics. But there were too many, and their madness gave them strength beyond fear. An Arbite officer stumbled toward him, clutching a wound that glowed faintly with warp burn. They came through the walls," he gasped. The metal moved. Batman looked past him and saw it. The corridor was warping, metal bending and twisting as though alive. Glyphs pulsed beneath the surface, bleeding light. From the distortion emerged shapes that were no longer human, mockeries of flesh and faith fused into one. He triggered a blast charge, collapsing the corridor and buying time. The explosion shook the fortress. As debris rained, he caught sight of Inquisitor Marentes on the upper gantry, barking orders through the chaos. "Seal the sanctum. Nothing leaves this place alive." Batman grappled upward, landing beside him amid the storm of debris. "War men are dying." "You'll lose the entire precinct." Marentes' expression was grim but resolute. "Then they die in service. Better ashes than corruption." Batman's voice was cold. "That's not leadership, that's despair." He turned before the Inquisitor could answer, disappearing into the smoke. He needed higher ground, visibility. The main spire's lift shafts were dead, so he climbed, fingers locking into cracks in the stone, the storm raging around him. From above, the scale of the devastation was staggering. The entire hive was burning. Billions of souls screamed prayers into the dark, but no god answered. Something glimmered in the distance, a beam of unnatural light piercing through the smog. It emanated from the industrial district they had purged days before, the site of the Prophet's death. Batman's instincts flared. That was the true center of this uprising. The Prophet hadn't died. He had planted something. He descended back into the chaos, commandeering an Arbite's hoverbike from the dead. The machine roared to life, engines screaming as he cut through streets littered with corpses and banners daubed in blood. The sky above writhed, the air splitting into veins of warp energy. When he reached the foundry, the gates had already been torn open. The same pit where the prophet had fallen now pulsed like an open wound, leaking crimson light. Around it, hundreds of cultists knelt in rapture, and above them, hanging in the air like a puppet of flesh and flame, was the prophet himself, his body reanimated, his voice a guttural hymn. "The vessel comes," he roared, "a born of reason forged in shadow. The dark night becomes the dark god." Batman hurled a series of explosives into the pit. The shockwave tore through the crowd, throwing bodies aside. The prophet's laughter echoed even as his form burned. The warp answered in kind. The ground split open, and a surge of demonic energy erupted upward, coiling around Batman like a living storm. He fought against it, every muscle straining as the warp sought entry into his mind. He could feel it probing, twisting his memories, showing him visions of what he could be. In one heartbeat, he saw Gotham reborn beneath his rule, crime eradicated, fear absolute. In another, he saw terror itself kneeling before his shadow. "Yield," the prophet's voice thundered, now everywhere at once. "You are chosen. You are what chaos has waited for." Batman's answer was a growl. "I am what you fear." He activated the scavenged power armor he had modified, its plates scorched, its joints fused with makeshift seals and fragments of the fallen Arbite's insignia. The servos roared as he rose, black and monstrous in the crimson light. The cultists fell back, mistaking him for something divine. He advanced without hesitation. Every movement was a weapon, every strike an execution. The armor amplified his strength. The symbol of the bat now etched across its chest in soot and ash. Bolter fire roared as he tore through the heretics, cutting a path straight to the prophet. The reanimated zealot tried to summon another wave of warp energy, but Batman's gauntlet closed around his throat. "You wanted a god," he said coldly. "A prey to me. A prey to me." He crushed the prophet's windpipe and hurled him into the pit. The explosion that followed consumed the foundry in a column of black fire. When the smoke cleared, the city's screams had faded to silence. The demonic storm above began to collapse, drawn back into the void. But the victory was hollow. The Arbites were dead, their fortress in ruins, the Inquisition scattered. Batman stood alone amid the burning metal, his armor cracked and smoking. Through the stillness a voice whispered, not from the warp this time, but from somewhere deeper inside his mind. "Fear is the purest form of control. You used it once to save. Now you use it to survive." He looked down at his reflection in a pool of molten steel, the armor dark, the eyes glowing faintly blue. Somewhere along the line, the man had become myth again, but this time the myth had no city to protect. Above Gotham burned, a cathedral of ashes dedicated to a silent god, and in its heart the dark knight walked alone, his shadow stretching through the flames like the echo of something no longer entirely human. The fires of Gotham smoldered for 9 days. By the 10th, the hive had fallen silent. No hymns, no gunfire, no prayer, only the wind, carrying the smell of cinders and sanctified ruin. The Imperium declared the world a cleansed, though nothing living remained to confirm it. Batman stood upon the edge of the foundry's ruins, the molten pit now hardened into a black scar upon the earth. His armor, patched together from Arbite's plating and scavenged servos, was scorched and pitted, its servomotors whining softly with each movement. Beneath it, his flesh was marked by burns that refused to heal, their edges faintly glowing where the warp had brushed him. He had saved the world, they said, but to him there was nothing left to save. For the first time since his arrival in this universe, he felt the weight of solitude. Gotham had been a machine of corruption, but it had lived. This world was faith without life, discipline without soul. He watched as the ash fell around him, wondering if the Emperor's shadow stretched far enough to claim this silence as victory. And that was when the voice returned. "You see now, don't you? They burn everything in their god's name and call it purity." It was no longer a whisper. It was smooth, deliberate, almost conversational. Batman's head turned slightly, though he knew the sound came from nowhere. "I've heard your kind before," he said quietly. "Liars who promise truth. Demons who wear wisdom like a mask. And yet you listen." He didn't answer. The voice continued, its tone shifting between command and persuasion. "You think you stand apart, but the warp is already inside you. It entered when you looked into the void and refused to break." "Huh? Do you think that defiance left you untouched?" Batman crouched by the cooling slag, running his gauntlet through the blackened dust. If I'm corrupted, he said evenly, then you'd be speaking through my mouth already. A low, rumbling laugh echoed across the ruins. A corruption is crude. I offer refinement. I am Malgarath, servant of Tisanch, the architect of fate, the changer of what must be. I have watched you since the moment you fell through the veil. You are a craftsman of fear, a sculptor of destiny. You and my master are not so different. He rose slowly. Your master thrives on manipulation. I fight it. You misunderstand. You don't fight it, you perfect it. The air rippled. The world shifted. Before him, the landscape melted into another scene. Gotham once more, but hollowed as if remembered through someone else's dream. The skyline burned gold and blue. Statues of him, Batman, stood where cathedrals once did, their eyes lit with warp fire. Criminals fled from shadows that whispered his name. The city was silent. Perfect. You've spent a lifetime trying to end chaos, the voice said. Here, you can. The warp does not resist will, it yields to it. You could make worlds orderly. You could erase crime, doubt, corruption. The Imperium worships death. You could make them fear justice again. Batman stood in silence for a long moment. The illusion was exquisite. The scent of rain on asphalt, the faint hum of power lines, the heartbeat of a city tamed. His voice was low when he spoke. And what price? Only belief. Malgarath murmured. A power is merely the reflection of conviction. The Imperium believes in a corpse. You could make them believe in something living. The illusion shifted again. He saw himself standing before legions of soldiers clad in black and steel. The bat symbol, now a rune of the warp, glowed on their pauldrons. They marched not as zealots, but as instruments of his will. Order incarnate. For a moment he felt it, the surge of possibility. A universe tamed not by faith or tyranny, but by design. The voice pressed closer. You've built an empire of fear before. This time it could last. Then another sound cut through the vision. The soft hum of a child's voice. He turned. From the shadow of a ruined alley, a boy stepped forward, small, barefoot, his face pale beneath grime. He couldn't have been older than 10. His eyes were empty, lifeless, but his voice was calm. Oh, you said you wanted to protect us. The illusion cracked. The child's skin rippled, his form flickering into a dozen faces, orphans, victims, strangers, all the people Batman had ever failed to save. You protect nothing, the voice hissed, its calm fracturing into rage. You preserve decay. The warp creates. Chaos is the only constant, the only truth. The city dissolved in fire. Batman dropped to one knee, the psychic pressure driving into his skull like blades. His armor system screamed warnings, sensors warping under the energy spike. But beneath the agony, he forced his mind into focus. A chaos creates nothing, he growled. It only consumes. The laugh returned deeper now, echoing through his bones. Then consume with it. You think yourself incorruptible, but you already walk in the spaces between gods. Every choice you make alters the weave of reality. That is our domain, Dark Knight. The light exploded outward. He found himself standing once more amid the ruins of Gotham. The wind was still. The sky was bruised purple, flickering with faint traces of warp fire. He staggered slightly, his body trembling, his heartbeat hammering in unnatural rhythm. For a moment his reflection shimmered across the cracked metal beneath his feet, and in it his eyes burned faintly blue. He crushed the vision, closing his eyes until his pulse steadied. You won't own me, he said aloud. We already do, the voice whispered from the edge of perception. Ownership is belief, and every time you doubt yourself, you believe in us instead. He forced himself upright, pain radiating through every nerve. The Vox link in his armor crackled to life. Batman, come in. This is Inquisitor Morentis. Do you read? He hesitated before answering. I read. Good. A strike cruiser is inbound. The Ordo Hereticus wants debrief. Gotham will be glassed within the hour. Batman's gaze drifted toward the horizon where faint contrails marked the descent of orbital bombardment. And the innocents? There are none left, Morentis replied flatly. Static filled the channel, but through it, Batman could still hear the faint echo of Malgarath's laughter, soft, triumphant, almost intimate. He shut off the comms. The ground trembled as the first bombardment struck, fire blooming across the horizon. He turned away, cloak billowing in the heat. He didn't look back. As he walked through the wasteland, the whisper followed, no longer pressing, no longer mocking, just curious. You killed a world to save it. Tell me, Dark Knight, how long before you do the same to yourself? The wind swallowed the words, but the echo remained. And though his mind denied it, part of him, some small, calculating fragment. Wondered if the demon's question had not been prophecy after all. The strike cruiser Sanctis Vaughn moved through orbit like a funeral barge, its black hull wreathed in drifting ash from Gotham's dying atmosphere. Batman stood at the observation deck watching the world burn beneath him. Whole hive spires collapsed like candles melting in reverse, their fires dimming as the bombardment erased every trace of life. The silence of annihilation was perfect, terrifying in its symmetry. Behind him the doors hissed open. Inquisitor Marentes entered, robes torn and dusted with soot. His augmetic eye flickered faintly as he approached. "Another victory for the Emperor," he said hollowly, "though there is little left to praise. Batman didn't turn. You glassed a world to kill one life. Kariti, how many more before you realize it never ends?" Marentes stepped closer, his boots echoing on the steel. "The Emperor's work never ends. Neither does corruption. We kill one to save a billion." Batman finally faced him. "And who saves the billion from you?" The Inquisitor's face twitched, but his voice remained calm. "You speak as though your hands are clean. I read the after-action reports. You killed the Prophet with your own hands, Tavor. You killed the Prophet with your own hands, Segugi. You destroyed his followers, his temple, his city. Was that justice or convenience?" "It was necessary," Batman said. "Then we are alike." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Outside, the last flames of Gotham flickered out. The planet was dead. Marentes exhaled slowly, as though releasing a burden. "The Ordo Hereticus wishes to interrogate you. They question your resilience to the warp. I told them you are not their concern. You will stay aboard until I can persuade them otherwise." Batman nodded once. "And if they disagree?" "Then you will not survive the questioning." He said nothing more. When Marentes left, Batman remained before the viewport for hours, unmoving. Time stretched, folded, and disappeared. The silence of the void pressed in until he could hear his own heartbeat. Under, and beneath it something else, a rhythm not his own. "You can feel it now, can't you?" The voice returned, colder, smoother, no longer distant. "You stand between faith and ruin, and both call you false. You act without their gods, and yet your hand moves like theirs. Tell me, mortal, what do you think separates you from the Inquisition you despise?" Batman closed his eyes. "I don't kill without reason. Reason is a lie you tell yourself so you can sleep." He ignored it, but the reflection in the viewport wavered. The stars blurred, and in their place he saw a faint figure materializing beside him, a form woven from smoke and fractured light. It resembled a man, robed and crowned with shifting sigils, but its face was always turning, never fixed. "I told you not to come," Batman said quietly. "You told me not to speak," Malgorath corrected. "But silence is wasted on a mind like yours. You've seen the truth, and you still pretend to belong to the dying. You could end their hypocrisy. You could rebuild this Imperium in your image. Rational, pure, unyielding." "You mistake me for a ruler," Batman said. "I mistake you for a coward," the demon replied, its smile flickering like lightning. "You wear your morality like armor, but you bleed doubt with every breath. Why else would the warp follow you? You invite us." The words cut deeper than he expected. He looked again at the reflection in the glass. His eyes flickered blue for a heartbeat, faint but undeniable. Malgorath drifted closer. "I offer knowledge, not chains. I can teach you to use what already dwells within. You could foresee your enemies' moves before they act. You could strike with precision beyond mortal thought. You could bring order to this galaxy of rot." Batman's voice was steady, though his heart pounded. "You want me to serve. I want you to lead." He turned away, but the demon's presence followed like a shadow. The ship's lights dimmed as the warp brushed reality. The machinery groaned as if under pressure. "Every empire needs an architect," Malgorath said softly. "The Imperium built theirs on worship. You could build yours on fear and reason. You already command both." For a long moment, Batman said nothing. Then he walked toward the central console and activated the holomap. The galaxy unfolded before him, a spiral of light and decay. Red zones marked the spread of chaos. Millions of worlds consumed, corrupted, or abandoned. And between them lay the broken spine of the Imperium, its communications crippled, its armies stretched thin. "This galaxy," Batman said quietly, "is a graveyard waiting for a god to die in it. Then become the god who never dies," the demon whispered. He studied the map in silence, tracing the paths of war with his gauntlet. He thought of terror, of the corpse that ruled from the golden throne. He thought of the orphans of Gotham, the countless innocents who had begged for protection and received none. He thought of Gathelmer, the billions burned for faith. The demon's voice slid closer, intimate as thought. You could change everything. He deactivated the map. No. I can only control myself. Malgarath's form flickered, the edges fraying like torn paper. Then you will watch them fall, one by one, until your restraint becomes their ruin. The lights returned. The hum of the ship normalized. The demon was gone. Batman exhaled, the tension leaving his body in a slow, measured release. Yet even as silence reclaimed the room, he could still feel the residue of its presence, an oily echo at the edge of perception. He knew the demon hadn't lied. The warp did respond to will. And somewhere, deep within, a part of him had wanted to listen. Later, when he finally lay in the barracks chamber, the hum of the ship surrounding him. Sleep did not come easily. His dreams were fractured visions. Cities burning, stars collapsing, 1,000 symbols merging into one. And through them all, a whisper threaded like silk. You already lead them, you just refuse to admit it. He woke before dawn, breathing hard, armor cold with sweat. The deck lights flickered as if acknowledging him. For a moment he thought he heard the faintest trace of laughter echoing through the ship's systems. When he looked to the viewport again, the reflection that stared back wore the same face. But behind the eyes a faint shimmer glowed. Not possession, not madness. Just potential, dangerous and infinite. And somewhere in the deep, patient silence of the warp, Malgarath smiled. Weeks passed aboard the Sanctus Vaughan. To the crew, the nameless outsider in black was a superstition, an omen who walked without sound and spoke only when necessary. They whispered that he had survived the warp's touch without losing his soul, that he conversed with inquisitors as equals, and that demons feared him. No one dared approach. Even the servitors gave him space, their mechanical limbs twitching uneasily when he passed. Batman used their silence. He studied, he learned, he listened. In the ship's archives, he absorbed every record of the Imperium's structure, its holy wars, its endless dogma. He read the history of the ecclesiarchy, the church that demanded worship of a corpse, the bureaucratic engine that burned worlds in his name. Each document, each edict, each purge had the same pattern. Control through fear. He understood it instantly. It was the same principle he'd used in Gotham, magnified to a galactic scale. But fear unrestrained became tyranny. He saw that now with the clarity of someone who had worn both masks. The Inquisition had summoned him only once since Gathelmer. They had tested his blood, his mind, his psychic resonance. The readings baffled them. No warp signature, no corruption, yet fluctuations of psychic null fields when his anger rose. Some whispered that he was a living weapon. Others called him an anomaly. The more devout called him tainted by fate. He didn't care for their theories. What mattered was that they feared him, and he could use that. The ship finally broke warp translation near the Tiberian sector, a cluster of hive worlds besieged by insurrection. Chaos cults had ignited riots. The Arbites were overwhelmed. The Inquisition, desperate for results, sanctioned Batman to act as operative observer. It was a title meant to contain him. Instead, it granted freedom. He descended into Tiberian Prime's underhive alone. The city was a labyrinth of decay, kilometers of collapsed manufactorums, old cathedrals repurposed as slums, and billions of lives stacked in layers of misery. Smoke coiled through the streets like serpents. The distant thunder of artillery never ceased. Here, whispers spread quickly. Within days, the people spoke of a figure in black who hunted the heretics no priest dared face. They called him the Shadow Knight. He moved through the hive like a ghost. His armor, still bearing the scars of Gathelmer, had been refitted with scavenged Mechanicus plating, its power cells now integrated with a reactor stolen from a fallen Arbite suit. His silhouette was inhuman, part machine, part myth. When he struck, he did so with precision that bordered on prescience. Cult gatherings ended in silence. Demon-possessed psychers found their throats cut before they could speak their masters' names. The Inquisition heard the rumors and grew uneasy. Operatives sent to observe him did not return. Even Morentis began to question his loyalty. "You move without sanction," the Inquisitor warned over Vox transmission. "I move where corruption hides," Batman replied. "That should sound familiar." "The line between purging heresy and creating it is thin," Morentis said coldly. "Remember who commands you." Batman ended the channel without reply. He had no command but necessity. Over the following weeks his legend grew. In the spires above, nobles whispered of a black spirit that punished their excesses. In the underhive, the faithful prayed to him instead of the emperor. The Arbites carved crude bat symbols on their armor, claiming it brought luck against demons. Fear had become faith, and faith here was power. The irony was not lost on him. He had fought gods and refused worship, yet now, in this galaxy of endless devotion, he had become a saint of shadows. A heresy all his own. One night, while interrogating a captured cult leader, he felt the warp pulse again. The man's eyes rolled white, his mouth stretching into an impossible smile. "You wear divinity like a mask," the cultist crooned. "He watches through you now." The architect of fate sees his reflection. Batman slammed him against the wall. "If your god is watching, tell him I don't believe in him." The cultist laughed until blood spilled from his lips. "You already serve. You build order from ruin. You think that is mortal work?" He broke the man's neck and left him in the dark. Outside, the city burned again. Imperial ships were bombarding the lower districts, another cleansing. Batman watched the flames devour the skyline. He thought of Gotham's alleys, of its fragile humanity. He realized then that his war had never truly changed, only its scale. Behind him, a child approached, a scavenger from the slums. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her face was smudged with ash. In her hands, she held a small idol, a crude carving of him, shaped from scrap metal. "They say you protect us," she said softly. "They say you're the Emperor's new angel." He crouched to her level, his voice low. "I'm not an angel," she frowned. "Then what are you?" He hesitated. A reminder. She looked confused, but before she could ask, sirens blared again. Artillery struck the spire above them, sending shards of glass raining down. He shielded her instinctively, his armor absorbing the impact. When the smoke cleared, she was gone, swallowed by the crowd or the fire. The whisper came again, soft and intimate, threading through the chaos. "You save one and 1,000 burn. You kill one and 1,000,000 pray. There is no balance, only consequence." He didn't answer. He simply walked into the flames, cape trailing smoke. By dawn, the uprising was over. The cult was broken, the demons banished. But the price was a world half dead and a new myth rising in the ashes. Reports spread across the sector of a black knight who defied inquisitors, who hunted both heretic and priest, who fought without blessing or prayer. The Ordo Hereticus named him renegade. To the desperate, he was deliverance. Somewhere in the warp, Malgorath watched and smiled. "Even gods envy a man who does not ask to be worshipped," the demon whispered. And deep within the void between worlds, the Dark Knight moved unseen, his legend feeding on both faith and fear, until neither could tell the difference. "You resist corruption and it calls you master." He felt it then, faint energy coiling around him, threads of invisible force tethered to thought and intent. The warp responded, not with malice, but recognition. It listened. The reflection smiled. "You are not the Emperor's shadow, nor chaos's champion. You are something new, balance in a universe that cannot tolerate it." "A balance doesn't exist," Batman said. His voice trembled slightly. "Only the struggle between will and decay." "Then will," the reflection replied. The mirrors shattered. The explosion threw him to his knees, but there was no pain, only silence. When he looked up, he was alone again in the cathedral, the air thick with ash. The demonic presence had vanished, but its message remained. He stood slowly, the blue light faintly returning to his eyes, pulsing like a heartbeat. The warp's energy lingered, woven into his armor, his blood, his thoughts. It was no longer whispering, it was waiting, and then the silence broke. A brilliant white light flooded the nave. The air trembled. He turned and saw them, grey knights. They emerged from the light like statues come to life, towering warriors encased in silver armor engraved with prayers. Each carried a nemesis weapon, gleaming with psychic fire. The Lead Knight's voice boomed through the chamber. "By decree of the Ordo Malleus, you stand accused of heresy, unclean arts, and consorting with demons. Kneel or be purged." Batman's mind was calm, almost serene. "I fought monsters all my life," he said. "You're not the first to mistake me for one, but defiance confirms your guilt." The leader raised his blade. The others followed suit, their psychic auras blazing. The very air screamed with holy energy. Batman's eyes narrowed. The warp stirred. The candle flames twisted, bending toward him as if drawn by gravity. For a moment, even the Grey Knights hesitated, sensing the distortion. "I don't want to fight you," Batman said. "Then submit." He looked up, the faint glow in his eyes intensifying. "I can't." The first knight charged, blade flashing with divine fire. Batman moved faster than thought. His gauntlet met the weapon mid-strike. Sparks of psychic energy erupted between them, filling the chamber with blinding light. For an instant, the material world bent, the warp and reality overlapping, time collapsing into pure motion. When the light faded, the cathedral lay in ruin. Batman stood alone amid the wreckage, his armor cracked, his breath ragged. Around him lay the Grey Knights, unconscious, not dead. The air pulsed with raw energy, the walls dripping with the residue of warp distortion. He stared down at his hands, trembling, the faint blue glow now constant beneath his skin. He had not killed, but he had touched the warp and bent it, and somewhere deep within that impossible silence, Malgarath's voice purred in satisfaction. At last, the detective learns to act without evidence. Only belief. The storm broke over the dead city like the breath of a god. Lightning cracked through the clouds, painting the ruins in flashes of blue and crimson. Batman stood at the edge of what had once been a sanctum, the shattered cathedral's bones stretching into infinity. His armor, torn and smoking, pulsed faintly with energy that should not have existed, neither mechanical nor holy. It was alive in the way thought is alive. The Grey Knights lay scattered behind him, their bodies still but breathing. They had come to purge him. He had spared them. The warp had spared them too, though it whispered its displeasure. He looked at his hands. Threads of blue light rippled under his skin, moving with each breath, as if his body itself had become conduit and cage. The Inquisition would call him abomination. The demons would call him kin. He called it consequence. The vox crackled. Morentus's voice bled through the static. A Batman report. You've gone silent. What happened? He stared at the dead sky. They came for me. The Grey Knights? Yes. Then you're already dead. Batman switched off the channel. He began walking, each step echoing through the debris. The warp felt closer now, its pressure no longer external but internal, an ocean beneath his consciousness, rising with each heartbeat. He didn't resist it. Resistance had no meaning anymore. Instead, he directed it, shaping, defining, refining. The same discipline that had built the legend of the Dark Knight now held chaos in equilibrium. His path led him to the heart of the ruin, the pit of the cathedral, where stone met shadow. The air shimmered with heat and unreality. A pulse of blue fire rose from below, rhythmic, steady, like the heartbeat of a sleeping god. He knew what waited there before he saw it. Malgarath emerged from the chasm, his form now solid, tall, regal, clad in armor forged from the essence of stars. His eyes were galaxies collapsing in reverse. He smiled. You have come as all architects must to finish what you began. Batman's voice was low. You wanted me to kill them. I wanted you to understand, the demon replied. They would have burned you alive for what you are becoming. They call it corruption. I call it ascension. Batman descended the steps, the air warping around him. You said I could shape the warp through will. Then tell me, what am I shaping now? Your truth, Malgarath whispered. And your truth is this: you have never sought power, only control. But control is power refined. You are the proof that chaos can be conquered by discipline. Batman stopped. You're wrong. Discipline isn't conquest. It's containment. It's the only thing that keeps men from becoming monsters. Malgarath tilted his head. And yet you stand here, speaking to one, while the power of gods moves in your veins. Lightning flared. The ground cracked, splitting around them. From the fissures rose figures of smoke and fire, demons drawn by his presence. Their forms twisted into mockeries of angels, of bats, of men. They circled him like predators sensing prey, and kin. Malgarath extended a clawed hand. Take it. Take the gift fully. Forge the weapon only you can wield. Be the Dark Knight of the warp, the balance this galaxy never had. The demons hissed in chorus. Knight of the warp. Knight of the warp, Knight of the warp. Batman felt the weight of the words settle upon him, heavy as destiny. He saw, in 1,000 branching futures, what it could mean. To walk the void between gods and men, to end the tyranny of faith and the madness of freedom, to impose reason upon the storm. But then he saw another image, small, fragile, almost forgotten. A boy kneeling in an alley beside his parents' bodies, the smell of gunpowder, the cry for justice, the promise made in the dark. That was where his war had begun. Not in divinity, not in corruption, but in grief. He raised his head. My frère, he raised his head. You're right, he said quietly. I can shape the warp, I can bend it. Malgarath's eyes gleamed. Yes, but not for you. The demon's expression darkened. What? Batman closed his eyes and reached inward. The energy that had lurked beneath his skin ignited. The blue glow became white, searing, pure. The warp screamed, not in words but in sensation, as if something impossible had occurred, a mortal mind asserting total will. The demons lunged, but the air solidified around them, freezing them mid-motion. Their forms shattered into dust, disintegrating in silence. Malgarath staggered back, his perfect composure fracturing. You cannot." "They already did," Batman said. The light surged outward, tearing through the ruins, burning the corruption from the stone, the air, the very molecules of reality. The warp howled in agony, but the more it resisted, the more it conformed. His mind was an unyielding geometry. Fear made logic, chaos made order. Malgarath's form flickered violently. "You think you can cage infinity?" Batman stepped closer. "No, I can remind it that even infinity has rules." The demon roared and struck, claws of burning light raking across his chest. The impact drove him to his knees. Pain flooded through him, but pain was data, and he used it. He rose faster than thought, driving his gauntleted fist through the demon's chest. The blow carried not flesh, but will. The warp around them fractured. Malgarath screamed as his body disintegrated, collapsing into a spiral of light and thought. "You will never escape us," he shrieked. "You are us," he shrieked. "You are us." Batman watched him vanish into nothing. "I am what you fear most. I'm the one thing you can't corrupt." Then silence. He stood alone, breathing hard, the world trembling around him. The blue light faded from his veins, replaced by something quieter, an equilibrium between mortal and immortal, between reason and madness. His armor, once jagged and burning, now gleamed black and silver, its edges smooth, its form calm. The bat symbol had returned, but beneath it glowed faint traces of runes, reminders of the power he'd mastered, not succumbed to. He looked toward the horizon, where the warp sky began to clear. The storm that had haunted this place for centuries broke apart, revealing faint stars. For the first time since his arrival in this universe, Batman felt something like stillness. He turned as the sound of heavy footsteps approached. Marenti stood at the edge of the ruin, weapon drawn or frozen on his face. "What are you?" Batman regarded him for a moment. "What I've always been," he said. "A man who refuses to surrender." The Inquisitor lowered his weapon slowly. "You should not exist." Batman glanced at the rising dawn. Neither should hope. Without another word, he stepped into the light, vanishing into the mist. High above, the warp settled into uneasy quiet, like an ocean remembering its master's hand. And somewhere in that infinite dark, a single voice whispered, not of victory or despair, but recognition. "The night of the warp endures. The night of the warp endures." The void between worlds was silent when the Sanctus Vaughan returned to Terra. The ship carried no banners, no hymns of triumph, no broadcasts of victory, only ghosts. The Grey Knights had been evacuated, wounded but alive. The Inquisitor had sealed the official record, erasing mention of the event that had transpired on Tiberian Prime. Yet whispers had already begun, rumors of a figure who had defied demons and survived the Emperor's gaze without faith or prayer. Batman stood in the ship's hangar, watching the stars through a fractured viewport. The armor he wore no longer gleamed or burned. It had quieted, as though the power within had accepted its limits. The blue light under his skin had faded to faint embers, a heartbeat of restrained energy. He had bent the warp to will, but it had not left him. Nothing truly left the warp. Marentes approached, the echo of his boots measured and cautious, his augmetic eye whirred softly as he stopped beside him. "The Ordo is divided. Some call you miracle, others call you threat. They will never agree." "I don't need their agreement," Batman said. Marentes studied him for a moment, then sighed. "You've done what no one should. You've touched the Immaterium and kept your mind intact. But even if you resist it, they will never stop fearing you. Fear is the Imperium's oldest language." "I know," Batman replied quietly. "It's mine too." They stood in silence as the warp drive thrummed beneath their feet. After a moment, the Inquisitor spoke again. "A Terror requests your presence, not for trial, at least not yet. The High Lords wish to see the man who lived, and if I refuse, then they will send something worse than Grey Knights next time." Batman gave a single nod. "Then we go." Terror greeted him with the same oppressive majesty as before. The sky was a bruise of smog and light. Cathedrals rose like mountains, their bells tolling endlessly across the corpse world. When the gunship landed upon the Imperial Palace's outer platform, a procession of priests awaited, hooded figures chanting verses of purity, swinging censers that spewed waves of thick incense. They did not speak to him as he passed. They did not even look. To them he was a paradox. A man who had faced chaos and not been unmade. A man who had seen the warp and returned whole. To the ecclesiarchy that was either sainthood or heresy, Marentes led him through the endless corridors of the palace. Stone turned to scripture, metal turned to relic. They entered a chamber vast as a city, lit by shafts of gold that pierced through stained glass depictions of the emperor's glory. Pilgrims knelt by the hundreds, their prayers merging into one continuous hum. And at the far end, beyond the walls of faith and the sea of candles, loomed the throne. The emperor sat unmoving upon it, a corpse of radiant gold, bound by machinery that pulsed like the arteries of the planet itself. The light from his decaying aura washed over the chamber, warm and cold at once. Batman felt its weight, the psychic tie that pressed against the soul, the force that had shaped humanity for 10,000 years. He walked forward until he could walk no further. His breath slowed. His mind sharpened. For a moment he thought he could feel the presence within that silence, not divine, not conscious, but aware. Marentes bowed deeply. By your will, O Emperor, I bring the anomaly. Batman did not kneel. The pilgrims gasped. The guards shifted their stances. The Inquisitor's voice hissed, bow, fool. You stand before the God of mankind. Batman's gaze did not waver. The gods demand obedience, he said. I'm here to offer truth. Marentes' face went white. You defy divinity itself. But before he could draw his weapon, the air thickened. The light around the throne flared, burning so brightly that every candle in the chamber extinguished. The pilgrims screamed. Marentes fell to his knees, clutching his head, and then, amid that blinding radiance, Batman heard it, a sound that was not sound, a thought that was not his. You walk the line between shadow and storm. His chest tightened. Emperor, you have seen what my sons cannot. You have refused what even gods desire. You have shown me what endures when faith rots and hope dies. He stood frozen. The voice filled his mind, not with command, but with weight, vast and sorrowful. You are not of this age, Dark Knight, not of this realm, but you are what it needs. Where I am worshipped, you will be feared. Where my light cannot reach, you will walk. You will be my silence in the dark. The light dimmed, the chamber stilled. The Emperor's corpse was as motionless as before. No one else had heard a thing. Batman drew a slow breath. He turned, meeting Marentes' trembling stare. He spoke. No one speaks through the throne, the Inquisitor whispered. No one hears him. Then maybe he was listening, Batman said. Marentes took a step back, the realization dawning in his eyes. You're not a servant. You're a sign. You're a sign, Batman didn't answer. He only looked once more at the Emperor, at the god who had built an empire of fear and silence, and felt the faintest echo of understanding. They were reflections of one another, each holding the darkness back, each paying a price that no one else could see. As he left the hall, the candles reignited one by one. Behind him, the pilgrims began to weep, not in terror, but awe. They had seen the man who did not kneel, the man who spoke truth before the throne and lived. And somewhere, in the deep machinery of the Golden Palace, a pulse of faint psychic energy rippled outward, so quiet it could have been mistaken for a dying heartbeat. The Emperor did not speak again, but his silence felt different now. It was not the silence of death. It was the silence of acknowledgement. Millennia passed, though the Imperium no longer counted years as men once did. The stars themselves dimmed, swallowed by the endless wars of gods and monsters. The galaxy decayed into twilight. Civilizations burned and rebuilt. Faiths rose and fell, yet one legend endured. They whispered of a figure who walked the dying worlds. A knight in black armor, silent as the void, neither mortal nor divine. He came when the veil between the warp and reality tore, when demons spilled from the cracks of dying suns. He did not pray, he did not kneel, he simply fought, and the darkness recoiled. They called him the Silent Redeemer, the Last Sentinel. Some dared the heretical name whispered by dying priests, the shadow of the Emperor. He was none of these things. He was simply Batman. Terror was no longer a world but a monument. Its cities were dust. Its cathedrals lay buried beneath the bones of the ages. The golden light of the Emperor's throne had dimmed to a faint pulse that flickered once every century, as if remembering the heartbeat of something that was never alive. The sky was a constant dusk, painted with the remnants of battles fought long before memory. And there, atop the crumbling steps of what had once been the Sanctum Imperialis, stood the last shadow. His armor, corroded and scarred, was a relic of another age. The bat symbol across his chest was faded, barely visible beneath layers of ash and decay. Yet his eyes still burned faintly blue, the light of the warp tamed but never extinguished. The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the whispers of ghosts. He endures. He stood unmoving, watching the horizon where the sun no longer rose. Across the wasteland, the last of humanity had retreated into silence. Tribes of scavengers, feral psychers, lost cults praying to names no longer remembered. Even chaos had grown weary. The demons no longer screamed. They watched from afar, uncertain whether the game had already ended. Batman no longer needed sustenance or sleep. Time flowed differently for him now, his body and mind suspended in that narrow space between mortal and eternal. The warp had long since ceased its temptations. It had learned reverence instead. It whispered to him as a pupil might whisper to a master, inferential, fearful. He reached down and lifted a fragment of stone from the dust, a piece of what had once been a mural, depicting the Emperor crowned in flame. The face was gone, eroded by eons. Only the hand remained outstretched toward nothing. "You failed," Batman murmured. His voice was rough, ancient, but steady. "And so did I." The wind carried no answer. He closed his fist, crushing the stone to powder. "But I never stopped trying." From behind him came a sound, a ripple through the air, faint but unmistakable. He turned slowly. A figure was approaching through the haze, armored in gold, dulled by centuries of neglect. Its wings were torn, its helmet shattered, but its bearing was unmistakable. A custodian. One of the Emperor's personal guard, or what remained of one. The warrior fell to one knee before him. A lord of shadows, the voice rasped through broken vox plates. The light fades. The last beacon is failing. The Emperor no longer stirs. Batman regarded him in silence. "You kept vigil all this time, or we all did," the custodian said weakly. "But the choir is gone. The Astronomicon is silent. Humanity drifts blind through the dark." He lowered his gaze. "You were right," he whispered. "A fear could not save us. Faith could not save us. Faith could not save us." Batman stepped closer, his shadow falling over the dying warrior. "You're wrong. Fear saved them as long as it could. Faith kept them alive after that." Batman looked toward the sky. The stars were flickering, collapsing into the warp's endless haze. The universe was falling asleep, and the dream was ending. "I will wait," he said. "For what? For the next chance?" The custodian looked up, confusion flickering in his fading eyes. "There is no next, my lord. The galaxy is dying." Batman's gaze remained fixed on the horizon, where a faint blue shimmer trembled across the void, the last remnants of the Emperor's psychic light. "Then I'll stand until it does." The custodian bowed his head one final time. "Then we stand with you." But when Batman turned, the warrior was gone, dissolved into dust, his armor scattered to the wind. Only a single feather of golden alloy remained, glinting weakly in the dim light. He picked it up and placed it upon a fragment of the throne, a small gesture meaningless in the face of eternity, and yet it mattered. He looked skyward once more. The warp was restless again, its surface shimmering with motion. Somewhere in that shifting abyss something stirred, a tremor, faint but familiar. A voice. Not the demons, not the Emperor's, but something new. Young. Curious. Hopeful. "Who are you?" it asked like a child discovering the stars. He smiled faintly beneath the cowl. "I'm just someone who never learned how to stop." The wind rose again, sweeping through the ruins, scattering the ashes of history into the void. He stood unmoving as the darkness gathered one final time. When the last light of terror finally died, there was still a single silhouette standing against it, tall, unwavering, eternal. No throne, no banners, no empire, only a knight keeping watch over a kingdom of ghosts. The warp hesitated, almost reverent, then it passed him by. And in that eternal silence, long after gods and men had faded, a single truth endured. Even in the end, the Batman kept his vigil.